In the House of the Spirits, he will ask for help to restore Cousin Berto's sanity.
We have always been told that curses and dark sorcery belong only to the flickering reels of Hollywood horror films, mere fables meant to thrill the imagination. But beneath the blinding glare of the spotlight, where the brilliance is designed to hide the rot, the most vicious of curses have manifested in the flesh. We see it in the blood-deep bargain of a blues genius at a lonely crossroads, trading his soul for a master's touch on the strings. We see it in the agonizing punishment carved into the very identity of a pop legend, the heavy, haunting toll for a throne made of porcelain and gold. And we see it in the grim verdict of a prince of soul who stole the sacred breath of God from the sanctuary to sing of earthly desires, only to be silenced by his own Father's hand. Tonight, we tear away the velvet curtains to exhume the most terrifying secrets in entertainment history. We explore the haunted legacies of 13 black icons bound by the world's most horrific curses, where every peak of fame was, in truth, a death sentence, the blood-soaked price for a glory that never dies. 1. Sam Cooke, the king dethroned in the Hacienda shadows. Sam Cooke was the architect of soul, a man whose voice was velvet and whose ambition was iron. By the early 1960s, he had done the unthinkable. He stopped asking for a seat at the table and built his own, founding SAR Records to claim the rights to his music and his future. But in the shadows of the industry's ivory towers, the pharaohs he defied, the powerful men who controlled the lifeblood of black artists, were preparing a ritual to ensure that if Sam would not serve, he would be destroyed. The rebellion began in the high-stakes boardrooms of Los Angeles and New York. In response to Sam's defiance, a silent spiritual war was waged. Legend has it a single silk button was stolen from one of Sam's bespoke suits, a piece of his essence handed over to a root doctor to anchor the gutter curse. This was not a curse meant to silence his voice. That voice was still far too profitable. Instead, it was designed to rot his dignity. It acted as a spiritual weight, slowly dragging his spirit away from the grand ballrooms and the light of the movement, pulling him toward the grit and neon rot of the city's underworld. The refinement that once defined Sam began to fracture under the weight of this unseen hand. His judgment clouded, led by an inexplicable hunger for the dark zones of Los Angeles and the company of those who meant him harm. By the night of December 11, 1964, the descent reached its end at the Hacienda Motel, a $3 a night dive that was a world away from the velvet-lined life he had earned. Lured by a mysterious woman and blinded by a spiritual haze, Sam spiraled into a fevered confrontation with the motel manager, a woman who would serve as the curse's final, cold instrument. The gutter curse reached its horrific peak in the blood-slicked office of that motel. 3 shots ended the life of the king, but the true horror lay in his final state. The man who had taught an entire generation of black Americans to walk with pride was found slumped on a filthy floor, wearing nothing but a sports coat and a single shoe. He was left naked to the cold world, his majesty stripped away in a final, calculated act of ritual humiliation as a sordid warning to any who sought to own their own destiny. 2. Marvin Gaye, the final psalm of the House of God. On April 1, 1984, the music died at 2101 South Gramercy Place. Marvin Gaye was shot to death by his father just one day before his 45th birthday. While the courts called it manslaughter, the elders saw the violent settlement of a debt, a circle closing on a man who betrayed the altar for the stage. The shadow was cast in the House of God Church, where Marvin's father, a fire and brimstone preacher, taught that the human voice belonged only to the Lord. According to the Deep Roots Registry, when Marvin used that sanctified vibrato to sing of the flesh in songs like Sexual Healing, he committed a supreme sacrilege. He had stolen the Lord's wind to fuel earthly desire, stripping away his spiritual armor and exposing himself to the darkness dwelling within his broken home. On Christmas Day, Marvin handed his father a Smith & Wesson .38 special. In the traditions of the cipher, Giving a weapon to a man consumed by bitterness is a direct invitation for the grave to open. On a Sunday afternoon, a trivial spark ignited decades of fuel. The Reverend fired, the bullet tearing through Marvin's heart, the source of both his legendary music and his deepest agonies. Standing over his dying son, the father spoke with chilling finality. "I brought you into this world, and I'll take you out." Marvin Gaye's blood was spilled as a tragic final offering. The weight of the pulpit had finally crushed the man who tried to turn its holy fire into gold. 3. Michael Jackson, the covenant of the altered form. By the dawn of the 1980s, Michael Jackson stood at a spiritual crossroads. To ascend from a Motown child star to a global deity, he reportedly sought a power that transcended the charts, making a secret pilgrimage to the West Indies, a land of ancient unspoken rituals. It is whispered he struck a harrowing bargain. He would be granted the eternal throne of the King of Pop, but the price would be the systematic erasure of his physical self. He was never to grow old. Instead, he was to be transformed into a spectral entity that belonged to the stage, not the human race. The first stroke of this spiritual blade fell during the 1984 Pepsi commercial fire. To the Circle, this was no accident, but a ritualistic first cut, the moment the physical world lost its grip on him. What medicine labeled vitiligo in surgery called refinement, the spiritual world recognized as a biological vanishing. Every procedure was a step away from his roots, turning him into a porcelain figure, flawless yet haunting. To gain the world, he shed the very skin that connected him to his people, becoming a man without a reflection he could call his own. The debt intensified in 1985 when Michael purchased the Beatles' catalog, a move of financial defiance against the industry pharaohs. Consequently, the legal tragedies of 1993 and 2005 were viewed not as court battles, but as public exorcisms designed to drain the life force he had bartered for. The more he fortified Neverland, the more the world conspired to feed on his essence. The final reckoning arrived in June 2009, just 48 hours before his grand return in London. Michael had become a shadow, using propofol as a spiritual sedative to block the voices of entities demanding payment. On June 25th, in total isolation, he breathed his last. He died with his eyes fixed wide open, a chilling sign that he had finally seen the collectors coming to claim the remains of a man who had long ago ceased to be his own. 4. Donny Hathaway, the covenant in the copper wires. Donny Hathaway possessed a voice that felt like a direct transmission from the divine, a genius who could find harmony in any heartache. In 1971, within the decaying walls of a Studio Zero in Harlem, it is whispered he met an engineer who was more necromancer than technician. There, he reportedly struck a bargain for a heavenly frequency, a perfect pitch that would stun the world, in exchange for a terrifying level of access to his own psyche. He became a master of melody who unknowingly turned his mind into a receiver for a frequency that didn't belong to this world. By the mid-1970s, the silence in Donny's soul was replaced by an agonizing internal roar. What medical charts labeled as paranoid schizophrenia, the spiritual world recognized as the mind theft contract coming due. Donny became obsessed with the machinery of his own fame, often found at Atlantic Records, frantically dismantling microphones and amplifiers. He wasn't merely looking for bugs. He was convinced that the copper wires within the walls were literal conduits, golden veins through which a parasitic entity was siphoning his life force. Every electronic device became a mechanical mouth, a debt collection tool of the abyss designed to swallow his genius. The haunting reached its chilling crescendo on January 13, 1979, inside room 1508 of the Essex House Hotel. The scene left investigators in a state of quiet disbelief. The 15th floor window hadn't been shattered in a moment of madness. It had been meticulously dismantled from the inside, with the glass and frame laid neatly on the carpet as if by a professional craftsman. There was no disarray, no struggle, and no note. Donnie had traded his internal peace for a crown of thorns, leaving behind the ghost of a man who realized too late that when you gamble with your mind, the house always comes to collect. 5. Zora Neale Hurston, the thief of secrets and the verdict of erasure. Zora Neale Hurston was the dazzling heart of the Harlem Renaissance, a woman of fire, wit, and a hunger that couldn't be tamed by the drawing rooms of New York. In 1936, lured by the rhythmic pulse of the Caribbean, she ventured into the mist-veiled mountains of Haiti and Jamaica. She didn't just study the culture, she seduced its deepest mysteries. Whispers suggest she knelt before the Loa spirits, offering her own blood in exchange for the secrets of the living dead. She became an initiate, a keeper of the sacred flame, swearing that the forbidden truth she witnessed would be tucked away in the velvet folds of her soul forever. But Zora was a storyteller, and her greatest temptation is to speak the unspoken. In 1938, she released Tell My Horse, a book that read like a scandalous confession. She exposed the names of the spirits and published the haunting photograph of a woman reclaimed from the grave. To the high priests of the islands, Zora hadn't just written a book, she had stolen the breath of the gods to perfume her prose. The spirits, feeling the sting of her betrayal, wove a shroud of crossing around her, a curse designed to dim her light until she vanished. The glamour began to fade in 1948. At the height of her brilliance, a ruinous, false scandal tore through her life, tarnishing her reputation in a heartbeat. Though she was innocent, the air around her turned frigid. A wall of silence rose, her publishers became strangers, and her once vibrant circle of admirers turned to ghosts. The spirits had blocked her flow, turning the queen of the Renaissance into a wanderer in the shadows of her own legacy. By 1960, the woman who once outshone the Manhattan skyline was working as a maid in Florida. Her hands, which once held the secrets of gods, now scrubbed the floors of strangers. She died in the quiet ache of isolation and was laid to rest in a weed-choked, unmarked plot. For 13 years, the world forgot her name, the ultimate price for a woman who dared to bargain with the divine and then tell their tales. It took a sister spirit, Alice Walker, to find that lonely patch of earth in 1973 and perform the ritual of remembrance needed to finally call Zora's soul back from the silence. 6. Richard Pryor, the failed fire of purification. Richard Pryor was a man born into a world of shadows, raised in a Peoria brothel where the spirits of violence and abuse were the only family he knew. He spent his life running from the ghosts of his childhood, eventually turning to cocaine as a bridge to a darker, more volatile power. On the night of June 9, 1980, he attempted to do the impossible. He tried to use the flames of the physical world to incinerate the demons of his soul. In what many spiritualists call a failed purification ritual, Pryor doused himself in rum and lit a match, transforming his Northridge home into a chamber of hellfire. While he initially joked to the press that the fire was just the sun coming to get me, Pryor's later confessions took a chilling turn. In candid interviews, he admitted the act wasn't a drug-fueled accident, but a deliberate attempt to burn out the monsters in his mind. He told reporters that while engulfed in flames, he felt a strange, terrifying peace, as if the fire was finally scrubbing his spirit clean. However, the spiritual community saw only a fatal error. By using earthly fire to attack the abyss, Pryor hadn't cleansed himself. He had merely marked himself for a more agonizing debt: the negative fire. The backlash arrived in 1986 with a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. In a twist of ritualistic irony, the man who once ran down the street as a human torch was now being frozen from the inside out. Conspiracy theorists noted that the curse had simply changed form. Since he failed to burn his demons, they were now dismantling his nervous system. This imprisonment in the flesh stripped him of his lightning-fast movement and his legendary voice, leaving him a silent prisoner in a paralyzed cage for 20 years. The final summons came on December 10, 2005. Pryor suffered a massive heart attack, but the real horror was in his final gaze. Those at his bedside reported that in his last moments, His eyes were fixed on the empty corners of the room, wide with terror, as if negotiating with invisible debt collectors. He died realizing that the fire he started in 1980 hadn't failed. It had simply spent 25 years waiting to finally consume the man who dared to play with the devil's matches. 7. Billie Holiday, the necromancy of Lady Day. Billie Holiday didn't just sing the blues, she tore the veil between worlds. In 1939, at New York's Café Society, she began performing Strange Fruit, a song that functioned less as music and more as a ritual of necromancy. In a room plunged into total darkness, save for a single stark spotlight on her unsmiling face, she summoned the restless. The Harlem Necromancy Guild whispered that by chanting the horrors of the South night after night, Billie was waking thousands of unavenged souls, pulling them from the red clay to stand sentinel in the shadows by her side. The song itself, a graphic, sorrowful description of lynched bodies hanging from southern trees, acted as a spiritual summons. The elders believed that by chanting those horrific images night after night, she was waking up the thousands of unavenged souls of the South and pulling them into the room to surround her. This act of calling the dead attracted a predatory force, Harry Anslinger, head of the Narcotics Bureau. To the streets, he was the White Devil, a man who hunted Billie with the hunger of a ghost. He didn't just plant drugs, he performed a spiritual strangulation, stripping her of her cabaret card to starve her livelihood and isolate her from the living. He sought to bury her voice while she was still breathing. The haunting reached its fever pitch in the summer of 1959. As Billie lay dying of heart failure at Metropolitan Hospital, federal agents performed a final ghoulish cruelty, cuffing her frail wrists to the bed rails. Nurses reported her murmuring to invisible figures in the corners. The strange fruit spirit she had summoned decades ago had finally arrived to escort her home. Billie passed away at 3:10 a.m. with only 70 cents in her bank account and $750 taped to her leg, a final desperate insurance against a pauper's grave. She died with her eyes fixed wide open, staring into the void. To those who understand the toll of political sorcery, the truth was clear. The last strange fruit to be broken by the rope of prejudice was Lady Day herself. 8. Dorothy Dandridge, the beauty imprisoned in the mirror. Dorothy Dandridge was a trailblazer who possessed a beauty so blinding it seemed to belong to a realm beyond the silver screen. In 1953, while visiting the sacred Soto Falls in Haiti, she reportedly performed a ritual under the midnight rush of the waters, a plea to the ancient spirits for eternal allure and the favor of Hollywood. It was a classic mirror bargain. Her reflection would remain radiant for the world to see, but her reality would be systematically drained to pay for that luster. She traded the peace of her private soul for a flicker of light on a celluloid reel. The spiritual tax was immediate and devastating. Her daughter Lynn's brain damage was whispered to be the sacrifice required for Dorothy's rise to stardom. In Las Vegas, an eerie omen followed her. A hotel pool was reportedly drained the moment she touched the water, a sign that her spiritual flow was drying up. By 1963, her fortune had vanished, leaving her hollowed out while her public image remained flawlessly preserved. The shadows finally caught up to her on September 8, 1965, inside the hollow silence of her Fountain Avenue apartment. Dorothy was found cold beside a large mirror, the victim of an overdose with only $2 left to her name. While she was financially and spiritually bankrupt, her face remained as perfect as it was in Haiti. The mirror had kept its promise of beauty, but it had become a gilded prison that refused to let her soul go. Dorothy died a queen with nothing left but her reflection. She had won the world's gaze, but lost her own light in the depths of the glass. For those who remember her, she remains a haunting reminder. Sometimes the very thing that makes you immortal is the thing that makes your life unlivable. 9. Prince, the death sentence in the divine sigil. Most stars spend their lives trying to make their names immortal, but Prince decided to murder his. On his 35th birthday, he didn't just break a legal contract. He severed his connection to the spoken word by adopting an unpronounceable glyph. On his 35th birthday, he didn't just break a record contract. He performed a spiritual execution by discarding his birth name for an unpronounceable glyph. By trading his human identity for a sacred sigil, he stepped out from the protection of human language and directly into the reach of the nameless shadows. This identity arson was monitored by the Deep Roots Registry, an elite circle of hoodoo scholars. Their private archives, the cipher, warned that a birth name is the soul's only harbor. By adopting the love symbol, Prince wasn't just rebelling against the industry, he was building an altar to himself. The registry noted that he had transformed from a man into an idol, inviting higher plane entities to claim his life force as tribute. His sanctuary, Paisley Park, soon became a violet-lit cage. Registry insiders whispered that the vault held soul shards, thousands of songs representing fragments of his spirit he had torn off and hidden. This hoarding left the man a paranoid husk, wandering lilac-scented halls, convinced the very air in the vents was breathing alongside him. The debt was finally collected in an elevator, a liminal space where the veil between dimensions is paper-thin. Prince was found sitting perfectly upright, eyes wide and fixed, as if halted mid-thought by a silent, irresistible command. He died at 57, crushed by the weight of the sigil he used to define his freedom. By abandoning his given name, he lost his spiritual shield, proving that when you trade your name for a symbol, you no longer belong to the world of the living. You belong to the sigil. 10. Nat King Cole, the Golden Smoke Covenant, and the Curse of Breath. Nat King Cole possessed a voice so smooth it could calm a storm, but in the brutal 1950s, talent alone wasn't enough to break the color barrier of national television. To charm the most hateful hearts, the Deep Roots Registry claims Nat sought a root doctor in Birmingham to strike a bargain for the golden smoke, a velvet tone that would make him a god of the airwaves in exchange for his breath of life. The contract was sparked on April 10, 1956, when Nat was brutally attacked on stage in Alabama. While the public saw a racial assault, the cipher, the registry's private archives, noted it as the moment his enemies fanned the flames of his curse. From that night on, Nat began smoking 3 packs of Cools a day. He told friends it kept his voice mellow, but the registry knew the truth. He was performing a slow burn ritual, inhaling the very ash required to pay for his unprecedented fame. The reckoning arrived in 1964. Doctors at St. John's Hospital were horrified by a cancer that behaved like a forest fire, consuming his lungs with a speed that defied clinical logic. As he lay dying, night nurses reported a chilling sound. Nat's breathing didn't sound like gasping. It sounded like wind whistling through ancient, hollow trees. The scent of burning wood filled the room, though no fire was present. Nat King Cole died on February 15, 1965, at age 45. When he tried to sing one last melody for his wife, his velvet voice had turned into the dry rattle of embers in the wind. He didn't just die, he self-immolated his chest to serve as a torch for progress. He traded his air for our history, proving that the man who charms the world with his breath must eventually surrender it to the shadows that gave him his song. 11. Robert Johnson, the bargain at the Mississippi crossroads. Robert Johnson was once a failure who walked into the Mississippi night and returned a legend, carrying a guitar tuned to the frequency of the grave. In 1930, he was a laughingstock, unable to pick a string without being mocked. Then he vanished. A year later, he reappeared, commanding his instrument with an unnatural speed that made witnesses swear 3 hands were dancing across the fretboard. According to the archives of the Deep Roots Registry, Robert's genius was a dark transaction. Legend says that at the moonless intersection of highways 49 and 61, a large, tall man took Robert's guitar and tuned it to the vibration of the abyss. As the cipher, the registry's private newsletter, warned, the boy was gone. In his place stood a man whose music was a borrowed light from a deep darkness. The curse followed him to every recording. In San Antonio, Robert played Facing the Corner, hiding fingers that moved with a skeletal, impossible grace. He lived in a state of perpetual flight, never sleeping in the same bed for more than 2 nights, his eyes scanning the shadows for the dogs of the floor he knew were closing in. On August 16, 1938, at Three Forks, the debt was called in. Driven by an invisible force, Robert drank poisoned whiskey and spent 3 days withering in agony. In his final moments, he sank to all fours, barking and howling like a stray, a literal possession by the hellhounds of his own lyrics. He died at 27, leaving behind 29 songs and a legacy of blood, proving that the darkness only gives you 3 hands, so it can more easily drag you into the night. 12. Phyllis Hyman, the Song of the Haunted Sophisticate. Phyllis Hyman was a goddess of jazz, 6 feet of breathtaking elegance with a voice that could mend a broken heart. Yet, in the high-stakes world of Manhattan's elite clubs, her brilliance bred a deadly envy. She was a queen who didn't realize that while she captured the spotlight, someone in the wings was busy weaving her shroud. Her decline was tracked by the Sanctuary of the Seven Sisters, a secret society of root workers in Harlem. Their bulletin, the Shadow Journal, documented a chilling reality. A jealous rival had commissioned a shadow binding in the Georgia pines. This crossing tethered a parasitic spirit to Phyllis's aura, a curse called the weight of the shadow. It transformed her applause into a hollow mockery and her sleep into a battlefield of night terrors. While doctors diagnosed bipolar disorder, the sanctuary saw a spiritual attachment. Phyllis heard biting whispers when the lights dimmed, a stranger in her mind that pills couldn't drown. On June 30, 1995, at the Apollo Theater, staff watched in horror as she screamed at empty air. "What more do you want? I've given you everything." Witnesses felt the room turn ice cold as a suffocating silhouette draped over her like a heavy cloak. Hours later, Phyllis was found dead in her apartment. Her suicide note chillingly mentioned the laughter of her enemies, the final seal of the curse. At 45, her heavenly voice was silenced by a grudge that followed her into the dark. 13. James Brown, The Covenant of the Restless Rhythm. James Brown was heralded as the hardest working man in show business, a title earned not through sweat alone, but through a terrifying supernatural necessity. He was a titan of funk who bartered his soul for a pulse that wouldn't let him die, only to find that immortality comes with a cadence that never allows you to rest. The roots of this bargain stretch back to 1952 in the mist-choked swamps of South Carolina. Fresh out of prison and hollowed by poverty, James reportedly sought a backwoods root doctor beneath the Spanish moss. The entity summoned granted him the rhythm of the unresting, a surge of primal energy for global dominance, with one jagged condition: his soul remained his only as long as he stayed in motion. The moment the rhythm stopped, the debt would be collected. The proof of this pact was the legendary Cape routine. To the crowds, his stage collapse was showmanship. To the Deep Roots registry, it was a biological recharge. Each time James fell to his knees, he flirted with the grave. The cape thrown over his shoulders functioned as a ritual shroud, a temporary veil where his borrowed air was renewed. He wasn't just performing for fans. He was performing to keep his heart from stopping. By the late 1980s, this vitality soured into violent paranoia. His infamous 1988 high-speed chase wasn't just a run from the law. He was trying to outdrive the collectors standing in the shadows of his vision. The rhythm had become a cage, a frantic vibration allowing no peace. The music finally stopped on Christmas Day, 2006. In an Atlanta hospital, he shouted at the ceiling, "They're coming for me." He died on the holiest day of the year, his body too frail to perform the ritual one last time. Even in death, his remains were moved from crypt to crypt for years, a final sign that for the man who borrowed the rhythm of the abyss, even the grave offers no rest. These legends reached the heavens and invited the shadows home, leaving behind a legacy that flickers forever between the brilliance of their light and the heavy price of their immortality. If you found these stories worth exploring, hit like and subscribe to join us as guardians of these sacred legacies. Tell us which of these restless spirits calls to you most, or whose shadows shall we dare to unearth next? If you found these stories worth exploring, hit like and subscribe to join us as guardians of these sacred legacies. Share below which of these restless spirits calls to you most, or whose shadows shall we dare to unearth next?